What's going on, YouTube? We're back at it for another video, and today we've got the top 6 best support weapon stratagems that you should be using when pushing into those harder difficulties that'll give you the most bang for your buck when it comes to utilizing some of these support weapons, and giving you a little bit of a rundown on some of the tips and tricks used with some of these weapons, because more than a few of them do have some surprise features to them, or some things that you may not known or have known that you could have used them for that can be really beneficial, especially when pushing into those higher difficulties. More specifically, Helldive difficulty. A lot of these nuances and features that accommodate some of these support weapons can be life-saving and game-changing when it comes to being able to push through some of those and making it a little bit relatively easier for you. But that being said, let's jump straight into it. Coming up at number 6, I've got the autocannon, which may be a hot topic for some people. There may be some people that absolutely love this weapon, and by all means, it is definitely a fun gun, but it definitely does deserve its place at the bottom of this list. It is definitely not useless. It does have some capabilities to it, but they fall more in line with being somewhere in the middle of the road. The autocannon, in my opinion, is somewhere between the grenade launcher and the recoilless rifle, without that blast radius of the grenade launcher and that armor-piercing capability of the recoilless rifle. It does have a strong suited nature to be able to take out medium-type enemies, but that's about where it stays. You can end up trying to clear some of the packs of smallers with this, but it would be almost a waste of your ammo, and dealing damage against some of those heavier targets, if there's not a weak spot available that's been blown off from some of that armor, every bit of that armor is just going to ricochet that round straight off. And on top of that, with a hefty amount of recoil, the autocannon just ends up kind of lacking in a few departments that puts it down at the bottom of the list. It's still useful, it's definitely a fun gun, but there's a lot of things keeping it down here at the bottom as compared to some of these other support weapons. By all means, I wouldn't call it useless, but it is going to be something that, as long as you have somebody on the team that has that single target damage and somebody else that's working more towards that crowd control, then you're going to be the guy that's going to be able to easily clean up some of those medium type enemies that will be useful against facing off with some of those bloaty bugs, you know, the ones that are armored, that are green, that have that I guess like the poison bile or the acid bile. Those can be made quick work of with this weapon, as long as you're hitting them in the weak spot. That explosive damage is going to elevate the amount of damage, and it will be great for clearing out those types of medium enemies, along with some of those Star Wars walker robots. You'll be able to one-tap those over, and at the same time taking care of those medium automaton enemies is going to be making quick work out of them as well. So this can be life-saving in certain team compositions, but there are some other support stratagems. They may be a little bit more useful in different instances than the autocannon in every single team strategy. Coming up at number 5, we've got the Stalwart, which arguably number 5 could be the Stalwart or the machine gun. It can be up to your personal preference. Arguably both of them are almost the same, with the machine gun doing a little bit more damage than the Stalwart, but at the same time, both of them, you can ramp up the actual rate of fire if you hold down the reload or whatever your reload key is, hold that down, and you can actually amplify the Stalwart's rate of fire all the way up to 1100, and the machine gun can go up to 900 rounds per minute as well. Well, with the machine gun, you're trading off the capability of not being able to reload while moving and costing a lot of accuracy. So in the moments when you are firing this and being the person that is meant for crowd control, the machine gun can obviously be a little bit harder to control, and you will take a knee not only to reload, but in order to keep on target and mow down some of these enemies. It can be really satisfying, but the Stalwart ends up coming out on top in my personal opinion, as it feels as though not only does it have a larger magazine, easier to control at a higher rate of fire, which increases the overall DPS output of the Stalwart, that almost seems like it matches that of the machine gun, and with a deeper magazine, you can keep clearing a lot faster than you would with the machine gun. And on top of that, creating a bit more survivability while being able to reload while either moving or running is going to give everything that you need to possibly do one of those tactical retreats or reposition with your squad, and be able to still constantly look back after you've reloaded and start chewing through some of those smaller and medium type enemies to keep them off the backs of your other teammates and yourself. So the Stalwart earns its place at the number 5 spot as being solid for crowd control. But we've got a better one for crowd control coming up next. Coming up at number 4, my personal favorite, the grenade launcher. I do love playing the Grenadier in this game. I do love the capability of having that crowd control, and on top of that, also having a little bit of that single target damage, considering with the grenade launcher, we are dealing explosive damage with this, and when it comes to weak spots on enemies, this is going to have an amplified effect when it comes to its overall damage output. When hitting some of those weak spots on even some of those bigger armored enemies, you will be dealing more damage than you would be to that of something like the Stalwart, and you will be able to also have a larger area of effect when it comes to each one of those explosions being able to pop out. So it makes it perfect for not only taking out some of those medium enemies, but also the smaller enemies, and on top of that, dealing an additional amount of damage to some of those larger enemies where their armor's been broken by either some of your teammates or even some of your own stratagems you've been utilizing to break down some of those more armored enemies, and then be able to finish them off with something like the grenade launcher. And on top of that, it also comes with the capability of being able to destroy those nests or those holes, and you will also be able to destroy the automaton fabricator locations with these grenade launchers as well. That is going to prove to be extremely useful in some of those missions where you have something like Blitz, where not only are you going to have to rely on either your other stratagems for dropping in ordnance or possibly coming in with just some grenades or constantly having to resupply with grenades in order to get some of those down. Well, you can start to just pop out your support weapon and be able to take out the rest with relative ease and be able to quickly move through those missions. Sometimes I'd argue that in Blitz missions, you may just want 2 people with grenade launchers on that team, just to make it even more efficient, to be able to get it done as quickly as possible and possibly even get that achievement for doing it in under 6 minutes. But it can be a whole lot of fun to use as long as you know how to use it, and at the same time, do keep in mind if some enemies are too close, or if you launch that grenade too close to yourself, it won't explode right there, but when it ricochets, it may bounce back, and the next time it lands, it may end up blowing up in your face or blowing up in the face of one of your teammates. Do keep that in mind. It will bounce off even the smaller enemies if they are too close, so it is something to keep in mind with that. Coming up at number 3, we've got the recoilless rifle, which is all about dealing some massive damage and breaking the armor of some of those bigger boy type enemies that we'll be dealing with later on. On top of that, one of the biggest things that's going to be pretty beneficial for you and your team is the fact that shooting the legs of chargers with one rocket and blowing the armor off that and then switching to a primary weapon to finish them off is going to be one of your fastest routes to taking down these chargers. After finding this out, it pretty much makes some of those chargers way too easy, but once you get to Helldive difficulty and you're dealing with 4 charges at one time, this is something that you definitely need to use as a strategy in order to clear that crowd as quickly as possible, considering there is nothing worse than getting fully stampeded by multiple chargers at the same time as a Bile Titan right on top of that, or 2 Bile Titans if not more than that, and then the massive crowds of Terminid that will be following amongst them. It can be a nightmare situation, but sometimes the right situation requires an explosive amount of democracy and freedom, which the recoilless rifle can provide in quick succession if you have a buddy that will help you by wearing the backpack filled with missiles that need to be reloaded for your recoilless rifle to create a barrage that is much more accurate than that of the orbitals. But moving from that point, you will also be able to one-shot the arms off of some of those hulks. If you've dealt with a Hulk Bruiser with that flamethrower that seems to extend almost a mile long, it can be one of the most frustrating hulks to deal with on the automaton side of things, especially when you're behind a very tiny rock with multiple Gatling sentries just constantly going at you with those armored shields and then the missiles coming in, and I mean, who knows, maybe you even got blown out of that cover by some of those missiles that somehow already have a lock on you without having a pure line of sight on top of you. It can be a nightmare situation on the automaton side of things, but being able to take out that flaming arm while it's pushing you and your teammates can be life-saving and game-changing. On top of that, you hopefully have somebody that's readily available to start dealing some more damage to that, but just being able to kite that Hulk after that point without constantly being in fear of when that next flame-through strafe that he's going to put out there can come. It can be an instant killer, and being able to stop that from happening can save your entire team and get you to the point where you can possibly maneuver your way behind him and start hitting his weak spot, or start utilizing a different weapon in order to finish them off. Which, obviously, our number one pick is going to do quick work of some of those Hulks, but we'll get to that a little bit later. On top of being able to blow off the arms of some of those Hulks, we will also be able to blow up those tanks fairly easily with these rockets, and we will be able to take out some of those illegal broadcasts with just one of these rockets. And right after that, some of the most irritating moments when it comes to the automaton side of things. If you've seen those bot drops, there's nothing worse than having one of those land just next to you, and it's either got a ton of enemies, including a Hulk on top of you, and then maybe you've got multiple of them, and it can feel really overwhelming really quickly. Thankfully, with the recoilless rifle, one shot to either one of the engines or somewhere in the dead center can immediately destroy that bot drop, including all of the enemies within it. Now, in some instances, not all the enemies will die, but for whatever reason, the ship lands on the ground, and then those enemies that are still alive end up getting stuck in some bugged out position to where they won't be able to attack you, they won't be able to move, they'll just be kind of stuck almost midair, like they're still locked into the ship before they've dropped, or as if there is a ship right on top of them where they are. A little bit confusing. They may fix this in the future, but hopefully they'll fix it to the point where anytime that I'm blowing that up before they actually drop the units in, it will end up killing all of them every single time. But that would be ideal. And last but not least, you can utilize this to close up some of those bug holes and destroy some of those automaton fabricators. It would be a little bit of a waste, but if you're in a blitz mission and you're coming down to the last few objectives or the last positions you need to close up, then this could be one of those options you could use if you're one of those people that came in while other people had grenade launchers. Maybe people are on cooldown, don't have the ammo, don't have the grenades. You can be that last ditch effort to blow those out and then be able to just run for extraction as quickly as possible in some of these blitz missions. Moving on to rank number 2, you may find this a little bit redundant, but I'm telling you right now, there is a use for the EAT-17 expendable anti-tank above the recoilless rifle for a multitude of different reasons. Now imagine everything I just described is still capable with the expendable anti-tank. That EAT-17 does everything that the recoilless rifle, the only thing that it doesn't do is have a backpack with ammo. Every single time you call this in, you will get 2 uses of it, but you'll only be able to use 1 rocket per use. Now, the reason I have put it at rank number 2 is the simple fact that, 1, we have a very, very low cooldown, almost arguably one of the lowest cooldowns inside of the entire game. 70 seconds is the base cooldown, and after getting the ship module to upgrade and decrease the overall support weapon stratagem cooldown time, this will come down to 63 seconds. So effectively, every minute you will have the capability of having 2 anti-tank rockets available to you and your team, which is going to be almost indispensable. And each time that you drop these in, if you don't use both of them, they will stay on the map for the entire match. So if you're moving from somewhere near the extraction point all the way to the main objective, you could have a line of these anti-tank rockets. I'd almost say every time this thing's available, just keep throwing it out so it's readily available. There's nothing better than having that moment where you don't have to take a knee in order to reload that recoilless rifle or have somebody else reload it for you. You could just use it, move around, be able to either drop it in or just go grab another and start dishing out more damage. On top of that, if you got a teammate that doesn't have a support weapon, you'll be able to give them a support weapon through this so they can use other stratagems to further improve the composition of the team and enhance your capability of decimating whatever enemies are in front of you, liberating and creating massive amounts of explosive democracy through the power of the EAT-17. And also having no backpack gives you the capability of wearing something like the shield backpack, which is arguably going to be something you always want to have when facing off with the automatons, especially at Helldive difficulty. It is going to be absolutely life-saving. It can be also life-saving on the Terminid side of things, but it is almost a mandatory with facing off with the automatons, considering every single one of them is just dealing some damage from range, and if you don't have that shield, it's going to completely throw off your aim. It's going to be extremely painful, but these are things we'll talk about for a different video. The EAT, or EAT-17 expendable anti-tank rifle, is opening up a lot of possibilities for you while still giving you every bit of the power the recoilless rifle has. That is the reason it's on the list above the recoilless rifle, and the reason the recoilless rifle is even still on the list is because it still has its purpose within this list. It still has a purpose as being a useful stratagem, but has its own capabilities for other people's type of playstyle. It is still one of those weapons that is going to be a massive benefit to you, and at the same time it gives you the capability of really dishing out a lot of that massive armor penetrating and massive damage by utilizing the teammate reload. It is something that still has its use, and in certain team compositions can be sometimes better than the expendable anti-tank, but in their own right they both differ in certain aspects, but at the same time have the same might as each other in other aspects. It's a bit of a competing force, but I put the EAT-17 above the recoilless rifle, but they both have their own slots and capabilities. Now coming up to our final and rank 1 when it comes to the overall support stratagems, or the support weapon stratagems, is going to be the railgun. You may have already seen this, you may have already heard this. It is definitely the most dominating competitor when it comes to all of these support weapons. It is the most versatile. It has a massive amount of ammo at 20 rounds. It has armor piercing capabilities. It can knock the armors off the charger's legs in 2 shots, give you the capability of taking them down pretty quickly. It's dealing a good bit of damage to Bile Titans. It does seem to drop off at Helldive difficulty, but it still has the capability of dishing out enough damage to, by itself, take down that Bile Titan. It just may take quite a few shots. In the lower difficulties, more around like 7 or 6, you sometimes can get that one shot on the head. I'm not sure how to get that done in Helldive difficulty. I've done it before, but they may have just further increased the actual health of the Bile Titans. I know there has been a recent update that supposedly has further increased the harder difficulties of 7+ to a much more difficult time, apparently. But with the railgun, there are a couple of things to talk about with it. There is 2 modes to it. One is safe mode, which arguably I use quite often, but there is an unsafe mode, which further can increase the overall damage output. I wouldn't say it's actually the most worthwhile, but you can play around with it, and if you're a gambling man, this is definitely one to play with if you want a little bit more DPS. But with the unsafe mode, after you've held the reload button down and then switched it over, well, effectively your gun, as it's charging up, if it hits all the way to the full, you're going to have a bit of a Kentucky ballistic moment. That is quite the hot 50 BMG round right there, and this Helldiver can't stick a thumb in it. Quite frustrating. I wish we could, but actually, there is one armor set that can possibly save you from this, that gives you 50% possibility to not die from lethal damage, so maybe you can stick a thumb in it. Well, there's interesting thought process for a different video, but with that railgun, you had the capability of basically soloing anything with just this one support weapon, and I will say, against the automatons, this is almost a must-have, or at least 2 people on your team should have this. If you're going in for solo play, this is the #1 support weapon to really go for, because it's going to be versatile for just about every situation, from medium to large enemies, heavily armored enemies, against tanks, against those cannon turrets inside of the automaton side of things. Just about every type of emplacement besides the bug holes and the automaton fabricators can be destroyed by the railgun. It is extremely versatile, and by the time you hit level 20, some people would make the argument that you don't need any other support weapon. That's not true in my opinion, but having 2 of these on the team can be a huge benefit, as there's other support weapons that are going to be extremely beneficial for different team compositions at clearing through those harder difficulties with relatively ease. And without them, if everybody just had the railgun, I mean, it is, it can be a devastating force, but if everybody's using a railgun and nobody's using crowd control, it might be a little bit of a disastrous moment. And one other thing to add that I know when I've been playing with some of those randoms before that a lot of people didn't understand is that you can actually one-shot hulks with the railgun. It is absolutely devastating. It's not going to be the easiest thing to hit, but you'll notice every Hulk has this little red dot or little red line in the center of their chest, and that's going to basically be their faceplate. If you can line up the green dot from the iron sight on this, or if you can just line up that white dot inside of that little gray circle on that one select spot, you can be able to one-shot with a full charge in safe mode that Hulk. And there's nothing more satisfying than that moment. And trust me, if you feel like you can't get that, if you feel like that's a little bit too hard for yourself, don't tell yourself that, all right? Keep trying for it, and when you do get it, it's going to feel extremely satisfying, as the number one thing is, even if you don't hit that spot, every shot from a fully charged railgun in safe mode is going to stun that Hulk from actually either using any of its type of weapons. So it's going to be a benefit to just be landing those shots anyways. You don't need to hit the back with that. So at the same time that you're landing shots on this, just try to conserve on ammo a bit, or just try to get rid of that thing quicker by aiming for that little red dot in the center. And when you do hit it, it's going to be a good day for you, and especially if you get it in that one tap. Every single time I do it, it just feels really good. It may not be the easiest thing, but it can sometimes save a whole lot of time, save a whole lot of ammo, and can be game-changing in certain instances where possibly that Hulk's right on top of your teammate along with some other automatons behind them. It's going to be something to try and achieve every time that you're in the automaton side of things. Now, there are two honorable mentions that I will say, and then there are going to be a couple that I would say just completely avoid these, or completely avoid these at higher tier difficulties. Now, the anti-material rifle, I'm not going to say it's completely useless. I am not going to say this is absolutely a trash weapon, but in my personal opinion, this is literally something that's better suited for small to medium enemies. It does not have armor piercing capability, but it is useful in certain playstyles. I just wouldn't consider it one of those top tier weapons, and at the same time, it's going to need to be in the hands of somebody that is very accurate, somebody that provides Overwatch, knows how to utilize this type of weapon specifically. And I'm sure there's some people that can really make this thing work, and I wouldn't be opposed to having somebody provide Overwatch for me with something like this. There's nothing better than that moment when you're knee deep in all of the carnage, and the next thing you know, you're stuck on reload. You got one enemy running for you, but somebody from a distance just picks that off for you. You just start looking back with that smile at him and just nodding that head, just like that meme. It's a good moment, and I wouldn't mind having it, but at the same time, this is not something I would say is best suited for everyone. This is not something I would say is best suited for every team composition. It is a very specific type of playstyle, and if that's for you, by all means, but I would arguably say if you're just trying to toy around with this one, utilize it in lower difficulties and then ramp up later on with the right group of people and let people know that you're utilizing this type of playstyle. The other honorable mention I have is the flamethrower. This can actually deal some damage, but I don't believe it is actually really useful for those high tier difficulties, especially Helldive specifically. At lower difficulties, this actually has the capability of melting chargers even through their armor. For whatever reason, fire seems to get underneath the armor and start burning the actual health of that enemy, but at Helldive difficulty, either they just have so much damage resistance or they have so much health that it just took multiple canisters from the flamethrower, and I don't even believe I was ending up killing chargers with just the flamethrower itself. I was able to kill the small to medium enemies with a little bit of relative ease, but it has so many drawbacks to it, considering you have to be close with it, you have to be consistent with that flame on top of those enemies. Even the smaller ones are not going to be instantly killed by this. It is going to take a good bit of time, and if they're close enough, they will start attacking you, and inevitably you will either end up getting overrun or you'll deplete on that flame, and you won't be able to switch weapons quick enough with how close they are to being able to kill you. And at that same time, we've got the friendly fire with fire, that double entendre of it being also another, extremely dangerous capability of just being able to chew through or burn through your team just as much as you're burning through the enemies. For me personally, it's a meme weapon. It's something that's a good bit of fun, and I would utilize it in lower difficulties for that fun factor, and I hope that possibly they do buff this in the future, considering it does have a few drawbacks with that startup being a little bit slow with the flame coming out and the damage just not being as sufficient as I'd like. Maybe buffing the damage and keeping the negative aspects of it where it has that really strong friendly fire capability and that slow startup, but has that super melting power. Maybe even decrease the canister by a small amount, but increase that overall fire damage. That would make me feel this would be a bit more worthwhile in certain instances for a bit of crowd control. Coming up right after that, this is the last honorable mention that I would 100% argue that this is only for lower difficulties, and I'd borderline say this is one of those weapons I just wouldn't bother with, and that's going to be the Arc Thrower. The Arc 3 can move through multiple enemies, but it doesn't move through too many enemies. It does have a good bit of range to it, and it could be used for a bit of crowd control, but it is overall not the best weapon to use, and it would be something that is better suited for taking out these smaller types of enemies and not dealing a whole lot to anything bigger than the smaller enemies. You may end up just pretty much wasting your time with this. It does have unlimited ammo to it. It's more of something that's for the fun factor in my opinion, but it's not a whole lot of fun in my personal opinion. If somebody has, some secret to this that I just don't know about, let me know down in the comments below. I don't know whether or not this has capabilities of doing something more than just arcing through certain enemies and doing that at a pretty decent amount of range, but for me personally, the damage output from it is just a little bit lackluster, and the crowd control capability of it isn't as strong as some of the other support weapons. Now let's get down to the weapons I would arguably just fully avoid. The last 98 laser cannon. You can deal damage with this. You can basically have infinite ammo with this as long as you're controlling the cooldown of the heat buildup inside of this weapon, but overall, I don't see the damage output being that great. It's not armor penetrating, even though I would consider a laser to be something that could penetrate through armor over time, especially since we have the orbital laser. That may be a much more powerful laser, but it's generating a lot of heat to the point where some of these armored enemies feel like they should be melting under the pure, consistent ray of this laser. That's how I feel it should be done, but it just comes off a little bit lackluster. The damage applied isn't that great. It's not really cutting through enemies, and overall, even trying to just control the heat build of this just makes it really clunky and really ineffective in my opinion. I wouldn't suggest using this, but if anybody has some special purpose for this, please let me know down in the comments below. I have not found any reason to use this in any of my matches through multiple difficulties, as this was the first thing that I actually unlocked thinking this would be really good against something like a charger, or it could break armor, or be something just as a really cool weapon, and ended up being, immediately almost a complete letdown. And last but not least, I would not use the spear. This is pretty much a version that should be a more powerful version of the recoilless rifle and the EAT expendable anti-tank, but ends up being really clunky, really irritating, and not much more powerful. Even the armored tanks that you see in the video footage for this stratagem at Helldive difficulty do not get one-shot by these rockets. You have to lock on in order to fire this rocket, and the system for locking onto a target can be really finicky, and it can sometimes be almost impossible to get it to lock on, even when you're starting to lock on and then you're not even moving. I'm not even moving the aim for it, and somehow I'm losing lock, even though the enemy's not moving in a direction towards me, and it feels very confusing. I find it to be absolutely frustrating to use this. I've tried it a couple of times, and it was so lackluster. I would much rather just use the recoilless rifle or the expendable anti-tank rifle or missile, and it would be just miles better as compared to this. You even get less shots with this thing, and it's possible that the one aspect of this is that it has better range than something like the anti-tank or recoilless rifle, and it has that locking on capability. Maybe that's the aspect to it. But in general, a lot of times you're going to need something at medium range, and you're going to need it to be readily available right that instant. You're not always going to be capable of taking the time to sit there and then lock onto a target. So in my personal opinion, this is just a do not use support stratagem. It is just not benefiting the team in any way, shape, or form, and it is going to be very clunky for you to use. That's me personally. But that's going to be it right there, guys. That's the top 6 best support weapon stratagems that you can use inside of Helldivers 2. Quite the list right there. Hopefully some of this information has helped you out. We've got plenty more videos coming in the future, so if you'd like to see more of this content, hit that subscribe button. And if you'd like to see some of this content live, hit that link down in the description below. Follow me over at Twitch. We are streaming daily. we've got plenty more to come in the future, and with these updates in the future, I will continue to be making content for this game as I'm having a ton of fun when I can play the game. Hopefully later today, if not sometime this week, we do get a fix to all the matchmaking issues and the server issues. Hopefully there gets to be enough room for everybody to start jumping in. I even had some of the issues today and was a little bit worried I wasn't going to be able to make some of this content, but thankfully I was able to get in, and hopefully a lot of you are going to be able to get in a lot more often in the coming future and really sink your teeth into the game, because it's a good bit of fun, and man, I miss playing with other people, because soloing Helldive recently has been a real pain. But on that note, hopefully you've enjoyed, hopefully you've learned a couple of things, and have a good one.